Thanks for your patience. We're just coming up on a minute past the hour, so I want to let everybody know one more time how today's going to work out, and then I'm going to open the floor to get the session started today. So for those of you that are just arriving and didn't hear me talk about this a minute ago, we're going to be working today inside of the Zoom control panel. And for the webinar function, you're going to be able to see myself and today's two panelists, but we won't be able to see or hear you. It doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you, though. We're going to be encouraging questions and comments, feedback from you live during the session. So to do that, you're going to need to use the Q&A function that's native to the Zoom webinar. On the bottom of the screen for most of you, for a few of it, may be located at the top. You can hover over the Zoom interface. You can see that link, the icon there to Q&A. It's a chat bubble with a question mark. Pop that open. That's going to expose a control panel next to your screen where you can pose questions in real time. Most of those questions today will be held for the end for Q&A, but a few I might pepper in, disrupting our presenters to ask them to go just a little bit deeper and clarify where clarification is needed so you can get the best value out of today's presentation. Let me give you just a little bit of background about the inspiration for today's topic. Just a couple of months ago, I was in a call with one of our client partners. We're having a conversation about maximizing value and identifying target procedures inside the practice. And as always, I wanted to start with what they were already measuring and where this doctor and longtime partner was already extracting data to help them make the best decisions. And I was a little surprised to find that most of the doctor's decisions were really being made off of intuition, a little bit about alignment with personal passion, and that there weren't very many reports being reviewed inside the practice to really inspire and direct growth and to inform us as consulting partners about where and how we could lever marketing to get them growing. It got me thinking about the people that I knew in the industry who had rich in-practice experience and were deeply, deeply passionate about data. I immediately thought about Judy and Joe. So let me introduce them to you now, and then I'm going to turn it over to Judy first. So Judy Kozlicki has more than 20 years of industry experience. She's led both solo and group plastic surgery practices, some of the nation's largest medical spa brands as well. But today she's the head of aesthetics, wellness, and plastic surgery for the Skytale Group, a consultancy where she's helping practices to grow and scale. Joe Atzenbeck. So Joe serves as the CEO. He's also the co-founder of the Clinic for Dermatology and Wellness in Pure Medspa in Oregon. He's a Naval Academy graduate. He's a former intelligence officer for the NSA. And my experience with Joe is that he brings that precision and focus from his naval training to the way that he leads his own practice, as well as the consulting and the mentoring work that he's doing inside of industry. So thank you guys both so much for joining us today. My specific ask of you was to select 3 reports that are, I think, overlooked by many practices that can deliver really high impact in terms of business decision making. And Judy, do you want to kick us off?
I sure can. Thank you so much, Ryan, for inviting us. It's a pleasure to share the panel with you, Joe, and Ryan. It was so fun to catch up recently on the stage together too. So appreciate the opportunity. And as Ryan said, I've managed all kinds of sizes and shapes of practices, and I'm an operator at heart, but I am a data junkie. So I just rely on numbers, reports, and data to make informed decisions. And so this is right up my alley. I'm going to go ahead and share and get started. Hopefully I do this well. How are we doing?
You're looking good. We've got your presentation.
Perfect. So that's me, and we'll talk a little bit more about the kind of clients we work with in a little bit. And I know we promised you all that we were not going to talk about a P&L, but I'm using this as my agenda, actually. So I wanted to show you just a benchmark P&L. This is primarily for a medical spa. But using some of the key markers on this P&L is kind of how I'm going to shape the reports and data that we're going to talk about. So just initially, obviously, right at the top, we're looking at income. And as you and I all know, this is a relationship business. It's a service industry. So how we build the relationships between our providers and our patients is really critical to driving revenue. And this marker can be influenced by our provider revenue per hour, our revenue per appointment. And one of the key data markers that often gets overlooked, and I'm going to talk about, is actual utilization, provider utilization, and how those all marry together to drive that number. Another very key expense point on, or one of your top expenses on your profit and loss, right, or in your business, is cost of goods. And to me, the number one way that you can influence your cost of goods sold is through your service mix. So we are going to touch on service mix as well. This is a bonus stat for you because I'm not going to go too deep into compensation or anything like that. I just want to give you this benchmark. And this again is for your medical spa providers. Their compensation should remain about 15 to 20% of what they're producing. So in essence, another way to say that is they should be producing 4 to 5 times what we're actually paying them. Obviously, we have other support staff and admin and management in that total labor cost, but I just wanted to give you that little tidbit. And I'm not going to speak to this, but I know Joe is. Marketing, and advertising and promotion is a huge bucket and a big influencer, right, for us. I'm super passionate about lead conversion rates in particular, as well as your customer acquisition cost. And like I said, I won't be touching on it, but I know you'll hear about it today. So let's talk about our providers and provider production. What you're seeing in this data table here is basically a projection for a fairly new provider. So we do some work with new startups and helping them plan. So the top line is just revenue projections, but there are a number of factors that build and lead into what that revenue actually equates to. We have hours available, right? So if we are paying any sort of hourly, we need to know, how many hours are they available to be actually booked with patients. And this is the one I said, I don't see enough great data around actual utilization or capacity. So 2 ways to name it on this chart. It's called capacity, but I call it utilization. So what that means essentially is, how much time is a provider actually spending in treatment with a patient versus how many hours are they actually scheduled to work. And I'm going to give you a case study that'll really show you how this plays out. Again, this is a projection, a ramp, so this provider is not fully utilized, but they're growing and we're expecting growth. These are the things that drive then revenue per hour, right? So the hours booked is how we calculate revenue divided by how many hours they were actually working. And I know there's sometimes confusion about that. Some folks or practices will take that total revenue or production by provider and divide it by hours available. We like to look at it at actually how many hours are they actually seeing patients. So that revenue per hour number lies there. And then, of course, we drive the number of appointments or the number of patient visits. That's where marketing comes in and word of mouth and rebooking and retention. But the number of visits we have, that number divided by, our revenue divided by those number of visits gives us our revenue per patient, or sometimes called revenue per appointment. There are a number of things on the left. You'll see even service mix plays in. All of these data points, they all mix together. They all marry together to really form great data-driven decisions about growing your business. And when we look at providers, we like to, I say we because, again, I'm a data junkie. Our team, we love to analyze data and help practices grow. So when you look at the top data table, you're looking at one provider over time. And what we've done across the top is taken their last 6 months and what is their average revenue in the month? How many appointments are they seeing on average? And so that drives that revenue per appointment. And then again, hours available, hours booked. What is their actual utilization and revenue per hour? And you'll see,
Can I
yes,
interject a question really quick?
yes,
Eric's
of
got a
course.
question coming in on the Q&A, and I think we can see the answer in that hours available line and the variability there. But he's asking, how do you account for time that they're in consults, whether or not consultations are paid for inside the practice? And I think the related question that comes with that is, in many clinics today, injectors may also double as nursing assistants to surgical providers. How are you using that when you're looking at that denominator of hours available?
Yeah, those are great questions. Generally, we would include consultations if there is a consultation fee
Okay.
and a potential for converting during that time because they are actually patient facing.
Yeah.
As far as a nurse that crosses over and does assisting in the clinic side or with a physician, it gets a little more challenging, right? Especially if they're doing that not on a consistent basis, like this half of the day or that half of the day. But I wouldn't include those, right? Because they're not actually patient facing and able to generate revenue themselves. So you have to get, this is where it's sticky, right? Not all of our practice management systems track this well. There are other things that get in the way, like, oh, we've blocked out for meeting time. What about that? What about lunch? What about, charting time, et cetera, et cetera. So it gets challenging and sometimes a manual or labor exercise, manual labor to put that data together, but the closest you can get to it, the better.
Great.
Thanks. No, thank you so much for the question. You'll see again, just in the top here, we're comparing to the company average. This just helps with coaching, right? Your providers, you can let them know how well they're doing. This provider actually happens to be beating the company average by significantly in revenue. She also sees a lot more patients. Her revenue per appointment is higher. So she knows how to maximize the opportunity. And she has a patient in the treatment chair, right? So there's add-ons, upgrades, upsells, retail, all those ways that we can influence that. And just, showing her how well she's doing in comparison to the company as a whole. I would beg to point out that she's only at 53% utilization. So think about then, projecting that out. Like if we could get her to 70 or 80 or even 90% utilization, knowing what her average revenue per hour is, you've got a really good projection and a great focus to help, build that. Comparing providers is always one a lot of practice owners or managers, ask me, do you share this information with all of them? And I think that's a really individual practice decision. I think for sure you want to be comparing them for yourselves as a leader, because if you take a look and start comparing providers, look at provider 3 and 4. And I'm hoping you guys can see my mouse.
Yeah.
But provider 4 is seeing nearly as many appointments as provider 3, 41 versus 43. That's really close. But look at revenue per appointment. Look at the difference, 440 versus 160. So obviously our revenue total is nowhere near where it should be. And that makes revenue per hour, all those things a factor. So what does that tell you? It tells you maybe provider 4 needs some training, some coaching, some mentoring. How do we help her? I never want to use this data, to either chastise or, criticize or, unless you see it really consistent over time, there might be room for a performance improvement plan. but it's mostly there to help guide you in how you can best support your providers. There's a couple of just formulas over on the left-hand side of your screen, just to help. Okay, I have a quick little case study. This is actually a true story. I was working at a practice in which we had an esthetician. She was hired before my time, so I can't take claim to her hourly rate, but she was paid a very high hourly rate for a typical esthetician, and on top of that, earned commission. She was working 4 days a week, and she was not very busy. So her utilization was actually on average less than 40% consistently. So she was not doing a good job at rebooking or retention either. What happened with that is when you add up her total compensation, hourly rate and commission, we were paying her 70% of her production. And as you all know, that's just paid to production, right? It costs money to turn the lights on. It costs money for marketing. It costs money for so many other things. All that told me is we are losing money here on this person. So we had to do a tough thing. And we had to sit down. We did reduce her schedule, and we scaled it back to 2 days a week. Yes, by the way, we did reduce her hourly pay too. Wasn't sure how she'd take that. She did stay. And the point was, by doing so, we could then rebuild. And when she was able to be busy on those 2 days a week, consistently over time, we gave it a 90-day window. Then we say, we'll happily add back another day and rebuild you back to that 4 days a week. So obviously our labor expense got back into that target. Okay, service mix. This is a favorite as well, right? We all know that in the whole world of medical aesthetics, our injectables have the highest cost of goods. And a lot of our med spa practices are very heavy injectable driven. This is a benchmark revenue mix. And by benchmark, I say this is an ideal, healthy practice because our injectables only represent actually 46%. I'd say 50%. Lovely. If you can really lean in on your energy-based devices, right? These are high ticket services. They're actually very impactful. They create great results, but very low cost of goods. So high margins. This practice also, you can tell, leaned in on the wellness growth this past year, and that became a big portion. And that could also be the explanation why our injectables took more of a hit and a little lower energy-based devices. But on the top of it all, we like to benchmark retail at 10 to even 20% of your overall revenue mix. It's an adjunct way to improve revenue that we don't often think of. It's never enough just to look at it as a whole and what did the year look like. It's really great to actually start tracking this data over time. So what you see here is a monthly just revenue mix. And what you start to see are those trends. We all know that there's been a little bit of a dip, and maybe some people would say a big dip in filler, right? So that drove some of this injectable number and percent of revenue down. We did see in this first quarter a huge uptick in our laser and aesthetics, and that's kind of common. Winter is a great time to do those treatments. But look at the building and growth of wellness over time. So all of these trends, they help you make decisions about your marketing, about your staffing, about just the key operations. So tracking data, not just in a one and done, but over time to really help make informed decisions is really key. Okay, I have one more case study and then I'm passing it off to Joe or questions. This case study, and again, I hate to say this, but it's the same esthetician. She really loved microblading. And I'm a huge fan of microblading, so this is not a criticism about it. I think it's a brilliant procedure. However, it takes a long time. It's very tedious. So, and it doesn't bring a lot of money. There's not a lot of cost of goods, but microblading, typically your initial treatment. So if you don't know what it is, by the way, it's like permanent makeup for your brows or, little better. I've had it done. Um, um, the first appointment takes essentially 3 hours, sometimes more. And then there is an automatic touch-up that's needed at 4 to 6 weeks. Some people charge for it, some people don't. We were charging $550 for kind of that total. So think about it, $550 for that whole treatment, that took 5 hours. You can do the math, right? Revenue per hour is only 110 per labor, which was high. And any cost of goods, we were left with a profit of like $40 on 5 hours of treatment. It's a really obvious example. I forgive me for it, but you can compare it to any device, right? This one just uses Clear and Brilliant, a 30-minute treatment. It's typically $500, $550 in this case. And, subtracting our expenses there, our profit margin is more like $465. And that's in a 30-minute treatment. So making wise choices about your service mix and choosing and helping guide your team towards those higher margin services and promoting them and marketing them is really key to profitability in an organization. So thank you.
Sticking with this example for a second,
Yes.
Joe, I'd actually like to have you maybe chime in as well, since you've got the experience in your own clinics. In this model, is there a point at which you say we shouldn't probably be doing microblading? Like
We definitely
the
made that
tolerance
decision.
for a price increase to get the margin to the
Yeah.
target that you want is
Yes.
such that maybe we should, like, is there a conversation there? Like maybe we just shouldn't do this.
Yeah, we definitely had that conversation. And Joe, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. I just want to tell you what actually happened is A, we raised the prices. B, we also just had to limit the number of treatments she could do. I mean, it was like, she wasn't going to give it up. She had a nice following and people coming, but it's like, you're allowed to do one of those a week. That's it. If that, so.
Yeah, I would have the exact same thoughts. Either you fully eliminate it, or if you have a loyal following that can turn into something that you transform that patient towards, that is more of a higher ROI. That's definitely how we would leverage that. And I've absolutely had this scenario before, Judy, and the same thing. You just limit it to a certain appointments per week, and quite frankly, you really try and utilize maybe an hour that is historically difficult to book, based upon what you're seeing throughout your schedule and with that particular provider. So there's a couple different ways you can utilize a service that maybe doesn't produce a massive profit, but ultimately retains loyalty and a lifetime value of your patient.
Excellent. Sorry, back to you, Judy. We'll let you wrap that up, and I have one more question for you before we transition to Joe.
That is actually it for me. So I'm happy to answer any other questions or pass it off to.
Yeah, let me give you one question that I want to get while we're still fresh with your content. Then we're going to transition over to Joe. You talked about some parameters for utilization. You had some charts, for example, that suggested for a new provider kind of a 5% gain in utilization, over monthly in each month in the first 6 months, as well as kind of like revenue per hour targets. Do you have handy, and are you willing to share benchmarks for kind of, a provider utilization target, and then obviously what they're trained to do will matter, but a revenue per hour target that you recommend? How do you, in your consulting, how do you sort of look at the health of a practice and advise them you're doing okay, or we really need to do some work here?
Starting with kind of the benchmarks in revenue per appointment and revenue per hour, they're pretty specific to practices that have like injector only.
Yeah.
And then your esthetician who does, you've got esthetician only doing skincare, and then you have estheticians that cross over and can do laser services. And or sometimes you have practices with a hybrid across all, like nurses doing everything. So that's where it gets tricky. So yes, we do have benchmarks, but I'd have to go into each one.
Yeah.
But happy to answer anybody who wants to
Yeah,
kind
reason
of
for a practice to retain you
later.
afterwards.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sounds like the three, and we talk about this a lot, is, you know, an esthetician, a technician, and a nurse injector. And obviously within each category in each state, there's different certifications, there's different laws
Yeah.
about who can fall
Yeah.
into what category. But the implicit for this to me is the question, you talked about the model. This is really common among our clients, where you've got a nurse injector who's also being asked to do other things, usually because the injection schedule isn't full. A more expensive provider, maybe not the highest and best use of time. Do you have general recommendations for practices where they're trying to maximize performance, but they're sort of piling all procedure categories onto one person? Is that a good practice? Is that a practice where they should, you know, is it financially better to split time and have another provider who's less expensive to, you know, lower margin procedures?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I have sort of two answers, because I actually love it when there is a nurse who has some background in skin
Mhm.
and utilizing those energy-based devices, because they're bigger advocates for those services as opposed to just being focused on injectables. So I
Right.
think there's a really healthy, good reason to have someone who's crossing over, but an injector who is an injector at heart that is going to keep growing that, um, it does start to benefit the practice to really have them focused on building that injectable and
Mhm.
having maybe, you know, a lower paid technician that can also do that. You just still need that synergy, that
Yeah.
cross marketing, that, you know, marketing, promote across the hall. So again, the knowledge, if they have it, is great, but we encourage, I, and I'll back up. I'm going to enhance that answer a little bit. We often see new med spas start with injectables, like injectable heavy. Why? Because it's a big draw, right? It's your feeder. Toxins are what bring people in, and that's fine. And we know that when you get started, you're going to have a quicker revenue ramp, but your margins aren't going to be great. But as you ramp and grow and get the patient base growing, by year two, it's nice to then start incorporating some of the energy-based devices in there and some other higher margin services to really start to balance out your profit and your EBITDA. Does that make sense?
It does. Excellent, Judy. Thank you so much for that. Joe, let me pass over to you. And I think you had some slides that you wanted to share as well to bring up on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get that shared.
And we've got your screen and your slides are maxed. Perfect.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Ryan, for inviting me to this particular talk. And, you know, Judy, I just bow down to your expertise. It's a tough act to follow for sure, but absolutely brilliant talk. And I think everybody listening will get great things out of it. I'm going to take potentially a bit of a different angle towards how I utilize data in my practice with my business partner. And I'm, you know, more than happy to answer questions along the way. So really quick, I know Ryan introduced me, just a little bit about me. How the heck did this guy from the military and military intelligence specifically end up in medicine? Well, I think it's like most people in my shoes. You end up either married to somebody or you grow up in the practice and sort of find your way into that role. But for me particularly, I'm married to my business partner, ended up in this particular location just 20 miles north of the California border, which is actually a really difficult area to operate a high-end bespoke luxury med spa. And so we're a little bit crazy to have done that here. And some of the approaches that I take come from my background. So as a gymnast, you're trained that perfection is everything. That's where I started. That's how I got into the Naval Academy. The Naval Academy teaches you to execute the best possible leadership and really focus on culture. I really understood culture doing 7 deployments on a clandestine submarine mission. I do not miss that lifestyle, but I do miss the mission and the people. Very cool stuff. It's where I really learned the importance of data because we were out there collecting things for national security on behalf of the NSA, which is where I worked on land, running 24/7 operations, watch floors in support of more clandestine missions on air, land and sea basis, and some special forces missions too, which are pretty cool. And today I've found my way into the CEO seat, I guess by pure luck and just the circumstance. And I'm now able to take that experience and help develop some of the community needs because I run both a dermatology clinic and a med spa. So one of the things that we love to live by is that revenue is absolutely vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality or king, depends upon how you want to say that. A lot of people look at top line revenue and think, wow, that's amazing, you're doing so great. But that's really not the whole picture. It doesn't really show operating efficiency or how much your customers are churning. Profit, maybe a little bit better to look at. It's a helpful place, but it doesn't really show exactly where your receivables are and what that's going to drive in terms of your actual cash flow, which is really where we determine business solvency, the ability to grow and survive downturns like we experienced in the COVID era. So bottom line, even if a profitable company is looking great, they can run out of cash. And so a savvy business owner should utilize data and metrics to develop what I call true business intelligence to enable those strategic decision-making conversations that basically Judy just presented. I think that was a really helpful overview of that. So why does it matter? Bottom line, you have to make strategic investments, just like we were talking about at the end of Judy's presentation. Do we take cash flow that's available as we're growing? Do we put it in marketing? Do we put it in technology? What's the right decision? And how do you then get your team aligned with that, which determines really where you develop a metric and then a goal for your team, which helps you manage risks and determine inefficiencies, just like Judy went over in terms of the utilization of providers, and ultimately guide you towards those profit-driven decisions. So I'm just going to give you some examples of some of the types of reports that we run in my practice. This one is specific to the med spa, and it's a really interesting graphic. Most practices that I talk to when they're thinking about bringing on a laser into their practice, that's one of my favorite topics to talk about because everybody wants to know, when do I bring in a laser? What lasers do I bring in? And what's the return on investment and the best one to make? Well, the first thing you need to think about is what's going on in your practice today. If you don't have a laser, that's a different conversation. But for those of us who do have a ton of lasers, and my med spa is very heavy in the laser side, I really want to know, is the highest cost service really driving the highest revenue? And a lot of that's determined by cost of goods, but it's also determined by how many of those treatments are in a series, how many of those require additional supplies during the treatment. And a lot of practices don't really think that way. So if I'm looking at this graphic in particular, a lot of practices might say, gosh, Joe, I really don't want Halo. It's on a very expensive Jewel X platform. And so I don't think that's going to really determine a really great return on investment. And if you have been able to purchase that investment in a way that makes sense on a monthly payment, you can absolutely support the cost of goods because of the return on investment and how often that patient's going to need to come back and see you, right? So that's a really great graphic to understand what's happening in your practice. And by the way, these are things that anybody can produce with the AI platforms of the world today. You just need to send in sanitized data and you can ask it to produce these types of graphics. Or if you're lucky enough to work with somebody like Judy or maybe myself, then you can absolutely get these sorts of things produced for you as well. This one's one of my favorites to look at. And a lot of people think, oh my gosh, rainbow explosion. I can't look at this. It doesn't make sense. The cool thing is being able to look across your practice and identify a couple of different things. Number one, I can see trends right away. So in this particular example, we know that this particular med spa in January had a huge laser event. And so, of course, their sales were massive and through the roof. And there was great recording of that, capture of that actual revenue. And then we see that, while things are still wintry and cold outside, that people are spending the time doing those lasers. But I want to see which laser they're spending time on. And then we can move towards the middle of the year, and we see that summer sort of dip that we see in terms of this laser season that exists throughout parts of the country. Funny aside there, I would argue that people in Florida or very sunny parts of the world are able to run ablative lasers all year long, and so you can too. But this is a great talking point about marketing, right? Are we marketing the right device at the right time? Are we really making ourselves able to survive every season? There really should be less of this sinusoidal wave in the data, if you will. So I think that the bottom line is should you make certain choices, whether it's marketing or investing in new technology or training of your personnel, you can see that in a display like this. Kind of in a slightly different direction, this is probably one of the most important topics that I've actually had a discussion about in my office consistently. And a lot of practices spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of focus from their leadership team on should we chase after new patients, because new patient acquisition is extremely expensive. I am very grateful to have the expertise of Ryan's team at Aetna to help me make these decisions and help me run all of the different marketing components that I do need to attract new patients. Because don't get me wrong, most practices do see 25% or more in new patients. And so it is a very important demographic to go after. But a lot of practices fail to spend time focusing on the existing patients in their database, which are quite frankly warm leads. So are you leveraging tech stacking solutions to help re-engage or let people know that they're overdue for their treatments? It's one of my favorite conversations, and I'm a big tech stacking guy, so we use a lot of behind the scenes technology. Probably I'm lucky that my team has not hurt me over that, because it's a very difficult way to operate a business, but it's very efficient when done correctly because it removes the human component of needing to track and execute with all of that data. But before you make those decisions, you can look and you can see what your actual mix is and make those decisions based upon that. So I really like looking at that data. And if you don't have a platform for patient rewards or retention, I would absolutely encourage you to look at your data to determine how best to utilize that and develop memberships around that, right? Recurring annual revenue is a really great way to make yourself really seasonal. I don't know the right word here, but to not have to worry about seasons, if you will. So another really great look at your demographics, and something that I really have loved having the ability to look at since it was sort of brought to my attention, is this is sort of what Judy presented, but in a different capacity where it's spread out amongst the different types of treatments. If you've never utilized a chart like this before, it is incredibly revealing as to what demographics, number one, your team might be selling to patients, but how also they're being utilized. And so you can make decisions both in terms of what you should be helping your sales team really understand how to communicate to patients. Maybe you need to make a change to the way you communicate those. Or maybe if you're going to run marketing campaigns, that you direct it towards a specific demographic. Another really interesting part about this particular view is there tends to be a provider bias into what they think their demographic is. And this can really help remove that by presenting this data to the provider so that they understand that they're actually treating a much wider range of patients than they realize. And you can also better position whether or not maybe you should bring in a specific platform. One of the questions I ask with people who are interested in buying a new platform, specifically lasers, and it always comes down to a med spa that has been doing injectables for a very long time. they're interested in bringing in an energy-based device, and they're trying to go for something like an IPL or something like a Moxie. Those are really great lasers, right? They're fantastic. They have great results, typically low cost of goods. But is your demographic asking for that? Are they asking for laser hair removal? Maybe they are. And if they are, then you need to make a decision on what is the most optimized platform to produce the highest revenue and the lowest cost. And that is going to be on a device that moves quickly, that has great efficacy, that's within your budget. And if you've positioned it correctly and then marketed it correctly, you will have great success. So that's one of the cool things that we've leveraged, and we've made decisions based upon that. And I love, love, love this chart. So absolutely highly encourage you to create one from your own data. I know Ryan asked me to do 3 reports and I'm showing more, but I wanted to get into a little bit more of the weeds on other things that we look at. I think a lot of practices look at these things, but it's interesting if you don't look at the data in a silo, right? The current year is not enough. You need to see how you're performing year over year with your revenue per appointment specifically, that helps you to see how effective your training, your new technology, and your marketing is doing, along with your provider utilization that Judy spent a good amount of time explaining, which I really appreciate. A lot of providers don't understand that. Cancellation rates are a really interesting one. I threw it up there because there can be a little bit of a misnomer around cancellations and no-shows. One, if you don't have a protocol around filling no-shows same day, you absolutely should. There needs to be a group of people that can be reached out to and put into place same day. That also comes down to schedule utilization and booking correctly so that those things can be filled same day. But cancellation rate is the one I wanted to talk about because there is often inside of systems limitations on how cancellations are recorded. And what really matters is patient cancellation, not practice cancellation. And so you need to make sure you have a distinction in that data to best understand, especially in the medical world, what your real cancellation and no-show rate are. Those are very important. And then I threw up toxin compliance because everybody talks about it and you hear it all the time from the Allergan reps when they're in your office. If you don't have a good understanding of how often your patients really are coming back, you do need to track it. There is a difference between toxin compliance for existing clients. It's typically lower than new patients, and you can really turn those to be identical if your provider team is communicating correctly with patients and helping create a sense of urgency at the time of booking. So really cool things you can do with that. I could spend an hour talking about how to make somebody more compliant on toxin and have memberships, but it's a really cool metric to look at. And one other just last sort of topic to get to that's interesting and important, I think, especially in 2025. No fancy graphic for this one, but you can determine a lot of this based upon your P&L and other expense reporting. But if you haven't spent time auditing your contracts, whether it's a medical contract for the medical side, or a contract you have in place with a specific vendor who's performing a service in your office, it might be time to relook at that and have a real discussion about whether or not you're properly utilizing those services and paying the right prices. Making sure that revenue is growing is one thing, but controlling expenses is another, and they really should happen simultaneously. If you haven't heard of a GPO, don't use a GPO. You should get into a GPO. They're very helpful. Understand your labor benchmarking. Are you paying your people the right wages to help them be retained so that you can really get an absolute loyal following in the aesthetic world, and making sure that they feel supported and absolutely rewarded for all of the great things that they're doing. And then, of course, the big one is you have to plan for purchases. I think the American public in general is unfortunately pretty subjective to this, which is you like to purchase the big shiny object, but you really need to have a plan for that. So don't fall into the trap of buying a laser just because the laser rep showed up in your office. It needs to be the right one based upon the data. And I just wanted to end with this because it's an interesting metric to look at. If you've never looked at the cost efficiency ratio or the labor profit yield, I think it's really kind of an interesting thing to look at. And I think that you can absolutely do this calculation and just determine if there's any bloat in your particular operation, or if you just need to really adjust the labor that you have in place, whether that's based upon the utilization or overpaying your personnel or underpaying them. So those are really great things to look at. And then last but not least, if you want to have any more of my voice in your ear, you can absolutely reach out to me. This is just a fun picture of all of the devices in my office with my team. That was their attempt at high luxury modeling, but it was a fun sort of photo shoot to take. So thanks for letting me be here, Ryan. And again, thanks, Judy, for starting this all off.
Yeah, Joe and Judy, thanks again to both of you. While we're at time, I want to reserve just a couple of minutes if there's some additional questions that come in. I've got the first one kind of piling up. So for all of our attendees, if you missed from the very beginning, the way to do that is to hover over the bottom of your screen, go to the Q&A, click to open that control panel, and we can pile some questions in there. When you start looking, I know, Judy, you do a lot of kind of sell-side assistance within Skytale Group. We have some questions coming in about EBITDA and valuation. And not surprisingly, this is a big conversation with many of our clients who do a lot of work with private equity as well. How much do you focus on pushing EBITDA in terms of assisting clinics for driving their valuation? And of the reports that you shared, are there particular metrics, particular guidance that you think are most important in terms of guiding practice to the right moves to push EBITDA?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, Skytale Group, is made up of two divisions. We are also an investment banking firm, as well as the management consulting team. So yes, in sell-side M&A, what buyers are most interested in is EBITDA versus, yes, you need to see great revenue and revenue growth. But EBITDA is the number that is used for valuation. So it's very critical. So when we're working with clients, whether to grow and scale or prepare them for exit or sale, we're hyper focused on that and looking at, it's one of the reasons I chose to highlight sort of your two biggest cost categories are cost of goods and labor, right? But really digging into the things that Joe was mentioning, and drilling down. I loved your reports, Joe, by the way. And understanding that there are other key things that investors are interested in seeing, some of them being not only patient retention, but provider retention. So we talked about that quite a bit. They love recurring revenue, so membership models. We work a lot on streamlining membership models. A lot of people set up and structure memberships in which they're too heavily discounted and they're actually hurting themselves. And there are ways to restructure them that are extremely valuable. I'm going to miss a few. There's like 5 key markers that they look at. And, that's sort of one of the benefits. And when we're working with our clients is that we have an eye, we know what investors are looking for. So we're also trying to not only clean your data in a way that makes it, usable and that, but we're focused on the key metrics that they're looking for. So.
Excellent. And Joe, I guess one last question for you. Looking back over your reportings and looking at not only the age distribution, but just the revenue modeling that you're doing at that device level, you'd kind of looked at 2 factors. You looked at revenue per encounter. You looked at the lifetime revenue of a patient engagement, I think were the 2 key metrics that were modeled there. Not in that data was, at least I'm not sure if it was in the data, was the consideration of sort of platforming costs, consumables, all of those things. So we had a question coming in about how do you balance the revenue side modeling that you had on that screen with the cost side of the equation?
That's a great question. And it's probably the question we struggled with the longest as we separated my derm clinic into the separate med spa, because the derm clinic can no longer support those med spa expenses. And that typically, I'm sure Judy has seen this, it's very hard to generate a profit in an independent med spa, especially right at first, unless you have your whole entire process down to a T. And a lot of those devices are paid off. That can be really tricky. So what we tend to do is we look at, is the price point for the utilization time of that device going to return an actual investment? And that's where we start to see, okay, well, what does the industry let us charge? And what does our demographic let us charge? Those are two very different things, by the way.
Yeah.
And then if we cannot generate the right amount of profit by doing that, then we need to potentially adjust what else we can stack into that exact same appointment. Or how do we then stack an appointment on top of one another? So a classic example is, we were sort of warned this is a terrible idea, and so I actually love that I'm breaking the mold. We have this big, beautiful lounge. You probably saw it briefly on, like, I think slide 3 in my med spa. It has absolutely no revenue generating per square foot. It's massive. It looks like a hotel spa waiting room. And all the consultants said, don't do it, Joe. It's never gonna get you anywhere. It's just a waste of space. And what's funny is when we put our patients for numbing, they end up back in their robe in that area. And we have an alcohol license. We can serve them alcohol after they've been consented for the certain types of procedures that allow alcohol to be part of that. And they sell each other. It's fantastic, right? And so now I can maximize my schedule. They're already generating revenue with just talking to one another about what services they're getting done. We love that particular scenario. And then, of course, we love for some like the more unpleasant services like the ablative lasers that you just can't make everybody feel fantastic during. Maybe I'll bring in a massage therapist and enhance their treatment, right, to distract them. All of those types of things are very helpful, in addition to stacking, maybe lasers. So long-winded answer, but I think that sort of goes into many different directions.
Excellent. Joe and Judy, I want to thank you again so much for your generosity and give you just a moment to share for each of you a little bit about the consulting and mentoring work that you and your organizations do. So Judy, would you go first and just tell us a little bit about Skytale?
Sure. So I started to mention Skytale is really a boutique healthcare management consulting and investment banking firm. And I sit on the management consulting side, obviously. And I guess what I failed to say, you introduced me and said, of all the practices I've run and I've been that business arm, I think what I bring is personally to our team is that boots on the ground experience. So there's a lot of like, run it by Judy because you got to pressure test this data or this report or our thesis, because we have brilliant analysts on our team, and we're very focused not just on, financial deep dives and operational deep dive, but really strategy. So we help work with our clients to build a strategy and a roadmap, and then our goal is to really help you execute it. So we work with clients of all types. I had all of aesthetics, so plastic surgery, cosmetic derm, wellness, med spas, all of that falls into that realm. And I absolutely love it. It's been a passion for, over 20 years now. So that is the management consulting in a nutshell. We work with a smattering of different healthcare verticals. And then on the investment banking team, they work with owners and operators that are ready to sell and exit. We have a buyer list of over 200, private equity groups, family funds, other smaller investors, et cetera. So we're kind of all full service when you're ready to actually make your exit strategy and plan.
Awesome, Judy. Thank you. Joe, I know for both you and your business partner that you guys consult for industry, you lead executive roundtables to help other clinic owners, to give them a place to share and grow. Can you talk a little bit about where and how people can engage with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, I do webinars or consulting style phone calls, both with vendors or other practice owners, for two reasons. One, it only will make me better. And two, I really help and like helping to prevent people from reinventing the wheel. I think that is the most difficult thing in aesthetics and medicine is sometimes you feel siloed where you cannot talk to folks in your space because you feel like you're going to give away some trade secret. The reality is a lot of us have learned these lessons along the way, and there's no reason why we can't share how to be successful. There's enough patience for everybody. So I really love having those conversations. Because I've been asked to do so many phone calls, I've actually gotten to the point where I have to sort of limit how many folks can be on my schedule because I am still running 2 businesses as the CEO with 3 brick and mortar locations. And I have learned that the scale part is a little tricky. I can't be everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we are trying to do is really make sure that my team can run the show for me, and they've done that. And so now I have a little bit more time to do consulting. So we're launching a consulting business, and I'm more than happy to help if somebody likes what I had to say and wants to, utilize what I know in their practice.
Yeah, and your contact information will be shared on the blog post that we'll send out that includes the recording of today's session. I do want to take a second really quickly, and it's a tough question, and coming in from Kathy, and I'm trying to think about how to phrase it in a way that's going to give the greatest value to everyone, because this is like we're going to go long and this is bonus content right now. And it's the question about EMR systems and data collection, because at the heart of all reporting is the access to good data. And so Kathy, you're going to excuse me because I'm going to sort of reframe your question a tiny bit. And I think for me, it's really about your view on the practice management software slash EMR software that is going to most enable competent reporting. Let's assume that we've got practices that are compliant with their initial training, that they're using the software as the software is intended, that they're getting the good stuff in, the data is actually getting into the system, which I think Judy and Joe will both tell you 80% of the problem when you run into a practice to try to run reports is that the data going in is horrible. So there's, no matter what the platform is, there's no possibility of reporting. But assuming that we've got good data in the system, do you have a view on which of the practice management softwares you think are best enabling clinic leaders to do really thoughtful reporting and analysis on their business, either because they've got a great suite of existing reports or because they have great export and customization capabilities or report building capabilities native to that software?
Who wants to go first, Joe?
I'll let you take this one, Judy, then I'll chime in.
Yeah, we work with quite a number of practice management systems. You're 100% right that if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. And that's one of the reasons our team does the work that we do, because we can get to the root of it and actually help streamline and correct some of that, going forward. A lot of our practice management systems are evolving right now, due to what you've seen, the inherent consolidation that's going on.
Yeah, the P influence is
Med
driving
Spas.
these platforms to get much better about the reporting.
Right. And when you're consolidating in a platform and you're pulling, practices that are on all sorts of different management systems, you have to consolidate it. So them choosing the right one is also key. And like I said, there's no perfect one yet.
Yep.
There are many that are really doing a great job and working very quickly to enhance their product for an enterprise solution. I can name them, but I'll say top performers, right? Are Patient Now, Nextech's newer solution, Boulevard, Zenoti, kind of our top 4. They all have their nuances. You have to have people and you have to set them up correctly also if you're going to make a change. But I actually sit on a couple of different boards helping them with product development because
Yeah.
I've been on the back end and the front end. And it is really important, not only for you to have great reporting mechanisms to, coming from it, whether they're, out of the can or that you can customize, but it also has to be user friendly.
Yeah. I know, Joe, you highlighted one of the particular informational challenges with differentiating between a internal cancellation, you lost a provider day, doctor took a vacation day, and patient-initiated cancellation, but do you have a view? I know kind of your worldview is in the derm and the Medspa Clinic side about where you're seeing the best data enablement in platforms. This isn't necessarily like your top pick for all purposes, but as it relates to data enablement, do you have a view of who's doing it best right now?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier. I host this monthly meeting called the Executive Roundtable. It started off with just me and one of my buddies that were put on stage in front of our EMR's 2,000 employee group, where they asked us a couple of things like, why does our implementation get really bad reviews, and why is our just initiation phone calls to have a conversation not going well? So we gave them all that information. What we learned out of that is that we were on the same page. And so we established this rapport of users of the platform that I use in my derm clinic, which is ModMed. A lot of them have come from Nextech. Uh, I think that the reality is Judy hit the nail on the head. It doesn't necessarily fully matter which system you're using. You just need to utilize the system in a way that's repeatable and consistent, because if you don't have a protocol in place with your office in which there's a leader giving a very clear, this is the outcome of the data that I want, it's going to be very difficult to pull it and really marry it up to make some sort of an actionable decision later. But there are companies out there that I've leveraged that do what's called data warehousing, where they'll take disparate data sources and attempts to marry them up. It's very, very difficult and tedious work, and it's very hard to make that data become something that you can make decisions off of. So
Yeah.
I think that the real important point of that is you need to start with the data needs to be good going in. And that comes from great leadership and great design with the understanding of the ultimate outcome you're trying to do with it, which is to make business intelligence.
And it's something we counsel a lot for our clients who are about to launch into a new practice management software deployment is, especially if you've been in business for 10 to 20 years, you'll have some sense of the intelligence you wish you had at various moments in time. And if you begin by identifying those data needs and essentially define the use case, what do you want to do with the software? I want to be able to easily rate my provider's productivity and compare them one to one. I want to be able to see if there are conversion differences in the people who are answering the calls and booking consultations. If you define what those outputs are, one, you can find software that readily uses it. But two, I think you can also map your deployment and your staff training and check-ins to make sure your data is looking good, so that you ensure that those reports are being populated and are coming back with data that you can trust. Guys, you've been so generous for your time. We went an extra 15 minutes. Great bonus material for everybody who is live. As a reminder, the session today is recorded. It'll appear in just about 40 hours time on our blog for perpetuity. Again, just like the spirit that you guys brought, the generosity and what you're sharing for free for everybody who joined us today is just amazing. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.